A jobless, reclusive man in his mid-30s gets hit by a truck while trying to save a group of high schoolers. After dying in the hospital, he finds himself reincarnated into a new world as a newborn, retaining all his memories, including his perverted tendencies. Given the name Rudeus, he explores his home through a series of time skips until he can stand and walk. He comes across a chest containing several books, and over the next year teaches himself how to read them. These books are essentially guides for learning magic. Nicknamed Rudy by his family, he attempts to use magic and successfully casts a beginner spell without chanting. He continues practicing chantless magic until he accidentally fires off an intermediate level spell that blows out his bedroom window. Paul and Zenith, hearing the noise, rush over to investigate and discover Rudy's magical skill, deciding afterward to hire a tutor for him. The tutor, Roxy, arrives but turns out to be much smaller than they expected and is not particularly excited to teach Rudy. She warns Paul and Zenith that many parents overrate their children's abilities and that being slightly better than average doesn't mean becoming a master magician. However, Roxy changes her mind after Rudy, while trying to peek under her skirt, accidentally shortens an incantation and still manages to use magic. Realizing his rare talent, Roxy decides he is worth instructing. Later, Zenith calls Rudy and Roxy in for lunch. Rudy starts his formal magic lessons under Roxy's guidance and progresses steadily, thanks to his innate talent, and now having a skilled teacher to nurture it. A year goes by, and Rudy manages to learn advanced magic. His swordsmanship training, however, doesn't go as well, with Paul, who holds an advanced rank in all three sword styles, defeating him every time. For Rudy's 5th birthday, the family throws a small celebration. Paul gives him a sword, Zenith gives him a book, and Roxy presents him with a wand, telling him this marks her final lesson with him. The next day, Roxy tells Rudy that he needs to go outside for a final demonstration. But Rudy, still traumatized from his previous life, refuses to leave the house. Roxy mocks him for being afraid and tries to motivate him, saying it's not as scary as he believes. Eventually, Rudy gathers his courage and steps outside with Roxy's support. Roxy casts a sacred class spell, summoning a thunderstorm. Rudy, using his new wand, copies the spell and even surpasses Roxy's demonstration. Roxy then announces that Rudy has graduated, saying she has nothing more to teach him. She departs from the Grey Rat home with an emotional farewell, leaving behind a hidden gift, her panties, which Rudy finds and swears to treasure forever. After overcoming his fear of the outdoors thanks to Roxy, Rudy starts going outside frequently. One day, while wandering, Rudy sees some boys bullying a dirty elf child. At first, he stays back, but remembering his own experience with bullies, Rudy steps in and uses magic to clean the boy's hair. The boy has green hair, similar to the feared Superid race, but Rudy is relieved to see no gem on his forehead. The boy introduces himself as Sylph and expresses interest in learning magic. Rudy agrees to teach him and frequently goes outside with Sylph for lessons. Sylph shows good progress and even manages chantless magic, which shatters Rudy's dream of being the only one capable of it. As a storm rolls in, Rudy takes Sylph back home. A bath is prepared for Rudy, and he invites Sylph to join, but Sylph refuses. Rudy forcibly removes Sylph's clothes only to find out that Sylph is actually a girl. Rudy tries to apologize, but Sylph runs off. Following Paul's advice, Rudy and Sylph eventually reconcile, and Rudy cherishes the new friendship. Meanwhile, the Grey Rat family celebrates as Zenith reveals she's pregnant again. During the celebration, Lilia also announces her pregnancy, revealing Paul is the father. The mood turns tense, and Zenith prepares to kick Lilia out of the house. Sensing the situation, Rudy shifts the blame onto Paul, arguing that as her employer, Lilia couldn't refuse him. Paul, understanding what Rudy is doing, plays along, and Zenith decides to let Lilia stay. It's later revealed that Lilia actually seduced Paul. She thanks Rudy for defending her and finally accepts him as part of the family, after initially being wary of his pervy looks. Paul, however, becomes insecure about Rudy's maturity, feeling like he isn't fulfilling the role of a father. 9 months later, Zenith gives birth to Norn and Lilia delivers Aisha. Rudy then receives a letter from Roxy encouraging him to enroll in a magic university when he turns 12. Excited, Rudy shares the news with Sylph, who says she wants to go too. However, Sylph's family cannot afford it, and when Rudy asks his parents for help, they refuse. Determined, Rudy decides to take a job to pay for both himself and Sylph. Later, Paul knocks Rudy unconscious and sends him off with Ghislaine to the city of Rowa, leaving a letter explaining everything. Since Rudy would argue endlessly if given the choice, Paul forces the matter to ensure Rudy can earn money. The carriage is bound for Rowa, where Rudy's job is to work for his cousin's family. Paul also mentions Ghislaine, boasting he only ever beat her in bed, emphasizing her strength. When they arrive in Rowa, Rudy finds out his job is to tutor a girl named Eris in magic, reading, and writing. At their first meeting, Eris punches him square in the face. Swallowing his pride, Rudy proposes to her father and grandfather that they stage a fake kidnapping to earn Eris's respect. They agree. However, a real kidnapping occurs when one of the servants betrays them. Despite the danger, Rudy protects Eris multiple times, and with Ghislaine's help, they manage to return safely. Eris, recognizing Rudy's efforts, accepts him as her teacher. Rudy starts teaching magic, reading, and writing to Eris, while Ghislaine teaches both Rudy and Eris swordsmanship. Eris turns out to be quite skilled with a sword for her age, but isn't very interested in her academic studies. Rudy, stuck on how to motivate her, asks Ghislaine for help. Ghislaine shares a story about her time as an adventurer, explaining how she often felt inferior to others because she couldn't count. Inspired, Rudy comes up with the idea of giving Eris one day off each week to keep her motivated. On one of her days off, Rudy accompanies Eris and Ghislaine on a trip to the marketplace. While there, Rudy, being the pervert he is, shows interest in an aphrodisiac. Eris notices and tries to buy it for him, but Rudy refuses, saying he would only accept gifts she bought with her own allowance. Confused about what an allowance is, Eris later asks her father Philip for one. Philip agrees, and Eris eventually buys Rudy the vial as a present. Rudy is left flustered because he can't exactly explain to her what it is. As Eris's 10th birthday draws near, Rudy hands over part of his tutoring time to a dance instructor so Eris can learn to dance with nobles at her birthday party. During his free time, Rudy notices some books he can't read and realizes they are written in the demon language. He writes a letter to Roxy, asking for help, as she comes from the demon continent. Thanks to his efforts, Rudy begins making progress in learning the demon language and can soon read parts of the books. At Eris's birthday party, Eris tries to dance with another noble boy, but ends up falling. Rudy steps in, calms her down, and they perform an impressive dance in front of everyone. Eris thanks Rudy for helping her. Later that night, Rudy overhears Eris's grandfather discussing a strange ball of light appearing in the sky. He expresses fear that it might be a bad omen. 2 more years pass. Eris and her family celebrate Rudy's 10th birthday. Rudy feels down that his own family can't attend, but it's explained that Paul is busy dealing with monsters roaming the country. The first time Rudy hears of him working. Despite the sadness, Rudy celebrates and receives a high-tier magic staff from Eris, feeling deeply grateful for her gift. Philip proposes that Rudy marry Eris and succeed their family line. Although Rudy rejects the offer outwardly, it's clear he secretly wanted to accept. The next day, a massive dark cloud appears across the continent. Rudy, Ghislaine, and Eris go outside for Rudy to test his new staff. While outside, they are attacked by a man named Almanfi, who mistakenly believes Rudy is responsible for the dark clouds. Ghislaine clears up the misunderstanding, and Almanfi leaves peacefully. However, right after, a huge beam of light engulfs them. Rudy shields Eris from the blast and finds himself once again in a strange place filled with mist. He begins to wonder if the past 10 years of his life had only been a dream. There, Rudy meets a strange being who calls himself the Man God. The Man God tells Rudy that he has been watching him for a long time and only wants to help him. He advises Rudy to help the first person he sees upon waking up. When Rudy wakes up, he meets Ruigerd Superdia, a member of the terrifying Superid race. Ruigerd explains that he is not hostile and offers to escort Rudy and Eris across the demon continent. Later, Eris regains consciousness and upon seeing Ruigerd becomes terrified. Ruigerd, accustomed to this reaction, reassures her. After some convincing, Ruigerd leads them to a nearby Meagard village, Roxy's birthplace. During their stay, Ruigerd explains that the demon god Laplace once gave the Superids cursed spears, causing them to lose control and become murderers. He also tells them that the spear he now carries once belonged to his son, whose death broke the curse on him. Ruigerd wants to help Rudy and Eris as a way to atone for his past sins. Before departing, Rudy tells Roxy's parents that he will someday return as their daughter's husband. Rudy, Ruiherd, and Eris then arrive at the city of Rikaris. But first, they need to disguise Ruiherd, so Rudy dyes his hair blue to make him look like a Migard. They enter the city and register at the Adventurers Guild to earn money for their travels. Rudy names their party Dead End, hoping to leave the city quickly. However, their rank is too low to accept good-paying jobs. Following the man-god's advice, Rudy takes a seemingly simple lost pet quest. During this mission, they stumble upon kidnappers. In the confrontation, Ruiherd kills one of them, leading Rudy to scold him and make him promise not to kill needlessly anymore. To speed things up, Rudy creates a strategy, sending other adventurers on dangerous missions while Dead End accepts easier ones to quickly build money. Their plan almost gets exposed, but Ruiherd intimidates the would-be snitch by revealing his true identity, forcing him to stay silent. Meanwhile, back in Fitoa, a massive mana surge has caused chaos, scattering everyone Rudy once knew across the world. Meanwhile, Rudy and his group take on a request to slay a monster. They team up with another party in the forest and decide to fight the monster together. When the beast appears, it turns out to be far stronger than they expected. Facing its terrifying presence, Rudy freezes up, unable to act. Because of his hesitation, one of the other adventurers is killed. Later, as Rudy is on the verge of being killed himself, Ruiherd steps in, saves Rudy, and, alongside Eris, defeats the monster. Afterward, Ruiherd gets angry at Rudy for hesitating and not acting when it mattered most. Rudy apologizes sincerely. Later on, another adventurer finds out about Rudy's plan to exploit others by sending them on dangerous missions to boost Dead End's reputation. Fearing that this adventurer will expose them, Ruiherd reveals his true supered identity to him and uses intimidation to ensure he stays silent. After a short time, Rudy's group leaves the village and aims for a coastal city near the edge of the continent. During the journey, Rudy and Ruiherd settle their differences, and Ruiherd begins treating Rudy like a real warrior instead of a child. Ruiherd also shaves off his hair entirely to fully hide any trace of his supered identity. Eventually, Rudy, Eris, and Ruiherd arrive at a coastal city with a port. Meanwhile, Roxy and some of her companions also reach the same city by boat. Roxy continues her mission of finding Paul's missing family. She notices posters about Dead End's rising popularity, but because Rudy's alias is Kennel Master, she doesn't realize it's him. Rudy, meanwhile, struggles to find a way to get all three of them onto a ship. Because Ruiherd is a supered, the cost of passage is extremely high. Rudy considers selling his magic staff to cover the expenses, but Ruiherd tells him not to, reminding him that it would hurt Eris's feelings. At that moment, a man named Gallus approaches them and offers a deal. Gallus says he will smuggle Ruiherd if Rudy helps move some cargo across the sea. At the same time, Roxy searches the city but doesn't find any clear leads. One of her companions seems to have different motives. Roxy eventually comes across Eris and Ruiherd sparring, but mistakes them for supereds and runs away without realizing who they are. Back with Rudy, he reluctantly agrees to Gallus's plan. However, when he arrives at the destination, he finds out that the cargo he's supposed to smuggle is actually beast children being trafficked. Infuriated, Rudy and Ruiherd liberate all of the children. During the mission, Rudy also frees a magical dog, the sacred beast, and helps the local beast people. However, the beast folk mistake Rudy for one of the kidnappers and capture him. He's stripped of all his belongings and imprisoned in Dolia village. Rudy jokes to himself that the experience might awaken strange desires within him. Although he could easily break out of his cell, Rudy chooses not to, not wanting to create more trouble for himself. While imprisoned, he meets another prisoner named Geese, who addresses Rudy as Senpai. They bond over their shared love for beast women. Shortly after, Gallus attacks the village with his smugglers. Rudy and Geese escape captivity during the chaos. Instead of running away, Rudy decides to stay and help defend the village. Using his magic, Rudy helps put out fires and tries to fight Gallus. Although Gallus proves to be a tough opponent, Rudy is eventually able to defeat him with help from the magic dog and Geese. Ruiherd and Eris arrive later, explaining that they were delayed because they were busy wiping out the rest of Gallus's smugglers. The Beastfolk villagers, realizing they were wrong about Rudy, thank him and apologize for the way they treated him. Meanwhile, back in Fitoa, Eris's grandfather is held responsible for the Mana Surge disaster and is executed by the king. As the rainy season begins, Rudy and his group are forced to stay in Dolia village and pass the time idly. During this period, Eris befriends a girl named Tona, who is the daughter of the village's strongest warrior. While spending time in the village, they hear bad things about Ghislaine. The villagers believe she abandoned her home in search of adventure, and they hold a negative view of her. Eris tries to defend Ghislaine but gives up when she realizes it's useless. Tona, inspired by Eris's swordsmanship, asks her to teach her how to fight. Eris happily agrees, and the two girls become best friends. Geese, feeling guilty about Ghislaine's past actions, tells Rudy and the others that Ghislaine was rebellious in her youth, which is why the villagers thought it best for her to leave with adventurers. Eventually, Geese hitches a ride with Rudy's group, and they depart from the village. They finally reach the capital city of Milis and separate from Geese, who has personal business to take care of. Rudy tells Eris and Ruijerd to take a day off and enjoy themselves while he roams the city alone. While exploring, Rudy follows a group of suspicious-looking people and discovers that they are kidnappers. He tries to save a cat girl from them, joking internally that he wouldn't have bothered if it were a cat boy. As he moves in to save her, he's stopped by a skilled swordsman, who turns out to be his father, Paul. Paul, now an alcoholic, completely devastated and exhausted, takes Rudy to a bar where the remnants of his party are gathered. They were all victims of the Mana Surge and are still looking for their lost family members. Paul questions Rudy, asking why, if he was safe, he didn't write or try to find anyone. Rudy has no real answer, having been too busy surviving. Trying to lighten the mood, Rudy tells Paul about his adventures cheerfully, but Paul misunderstands and thinks Rudy is being insensitive. The two end up fighting in the middle of the bar. Everyone watches in silence, giving Rudy judgmental looks, making him feel ashamed and rejected. Unable to take it, Rudy runs out, haunted by painful memories of his past life. Eris tries to comfort him, but Rudy remains in deep depression. Geese confronts Paul afterward and tells him that he was wrong to blame Rudy. He reminds Paul that surviving on the demon continent is no small feat, and that Rudy should be praised for making it this far alive. He argues that expecting a 10-year-old child to prioritize searching for others while surviving in such a hostile place was unrealistic, even if Rudy isn't mentally just 10. Paul admits that because Rudy is so talented, he had placed far too much expectation on him. Geese tells Paul that if he truly wanted their reunion to be different, he might have ended up seeing a corpse instead of his living son. Paul, haunted by that idea, has nightmares about finding Rudy dead. Determined to fix things, Paul seeks out Rudy to apologize. When they finally sit together in a bar, both struggle with the awkwardness of the situation. After a long pause, they eventually have a heartfelt talk and reconcile. Rudy promises Paul that after delivering Eris home, he'll search for the rest of the family. Paul also visits Rudy's inn later, where Eris seems ready to scold him for hurting Rudy. Rudy tells her that he and Paul have made up. Paul also informs them that they no longer have to stay confined to towns anymore. They now have a night permit and enough travel money to continue their journey comfortably. Before leaving, Paul thanks Ruijerd for protecting Rudy. The two groups part ways emotionally. Meanwhile, Geese continues his journey to search for Paul's missing family. Elsewhere, Roxy returns to her home village of Magurdia. There it's revealed that most of the Migard communicate through telepathy, but Roxy never could, leading to awkwardness between her and her parents. Initially planning to leave quickly, Roxy decides to stay a little longer after realizing how much her parents missed her. They inform her that Rudy visited their village 2 years earlier. Roxy feels relieved to hear that Rudy is alive. She sets out once again with her party to continue searching for Paul's scattered family across the demon continent. Later, Rudy dreams of the man god again. This time, the man god tells him a way to meet Lilia and Aisha again. Excited to hear their names, Rudy decides to follow his advice. Upon reaching the kingdom of Shirone, Rudy recalls that Roxy had once worked at the royal palace here. He writes a letter to Roxy and mails it. While wandering, Rudy spots a young girl, Aisha, being chased by some pursuers. Rudy saves her without revealing his identity, and following the man god's advice, questions her indirectly. Aisha explains that she's trying to deliver a letter to her father because her mother, Lilia, is being held hostage at the castle. She also calls her brother, Rudy, a useless pervert because she found the box containing Roxy's panties. Embarrassed, Rudy promises to help her. He entrusts Aisha to Eris and Ruijerd's care for protection. Rudy then heads for the castle after being summoned by who he assumes is Roxy. However, he falls into a trap set by Prince Pax. It turns out Roxy left long ago, and Pax plans to use Rudy as bait to lure her back, knowing Roxy once idolized Rudy. Rudy is imprisoned inside a magic-absorbing cell that nullifies all of his spells. Inside, Rudy meets another prisoner, Prince Zenoba. Zenoba, fascinated by figurines, is amazed to learn that Rudy handcrafted the Roxy figure he carries. Meanwhile, Eris and Ruijerd infiltrate the castle with help from some rebellious guards who seek to overthrow Pax and free their families. While sneaking inside, Aisha reveals that Zenoba is a blessed child, someone born with superhuman strength. Zenoba uses his power to force Pax into obedience and orders him to release Rudy. The guards surrender after learning their families are safe. Lilia and Aisha are safely brought to Rudy. Lilia embraces Rudy and tells him how much she missed him. She gives Rudy a necklace Sophie had made for him on his 10th birthday. As they depart, Rudy gives his old Roxy-given necklace to Aisha as a keepsake. Aisha, poking her head from a window, apologizes for calling Rudy a pervert, meaning she recognized him all along. During their journey through a cave, Rudy, Eris, and Ruijerd encounter dragon god Orsted. Paralyzed by his overwhelming presence, Eris and Ruijerd are unable to move. Rudy, not knowing who Orsted is, approaches him without fear. Orsted, sensing the man-god's influence on Rudy, immediately attacks. Despite Rudy's efforts to defend himself, Orsted overwhelms him effortlessly and delivers a fatal blow. Before dying, Rudy meets the man-god again, who explains that he couldn't foresee this attack because Orsted is outside his vision. The man-god also tells Rudy that Laplace, who cursed the Superds, had green hair, explaining why shaving his head reduced Ruijerd's curse effect. Rudy thanks the man-god despite everything and prepares for death. However, Rudy awakens again, alive. It's revealed that Nanahoshi, the girl traveling with Orsted, convinced him to spare Rudy. When Rudy recovers, he explains everything to Ruijerd, including the man-god's involvement. Later, Rudy and his group finally reach Rowa, but find it devastated. They learn that Eris's parents have both died. One of the Grey Rat branch families offers to marry Eris off, but Ghislaine is against it. Eris gives no immediate answer. That night, Eris visits Rudy's tent. Heartbroken and seeking comfort, Eris initiates intimacy with Rudy. Rudy tries to refuse at first, knowing she's grieving, but ultimately gives in after Eris pleads with him. The next morning, Rudy wakes up overjoyed by the previous night. However, he quickly realizes that Eris and Ghislaine have disappeared without saying goodbye. Devastated, Rudy falls into deep depression. He spends his days wandering, shutting himself off emotionally. He frequently reflects on his past life and old memories. Meanwhile, Eris and Ghislaine are on a journey to become stronger. Eris wants to defeat Orsted someday and protect Rudy, whom she loves. Ruijerd continues traveling too, saving people and improving the Supered reputation. Geese and Zenoba are also on their own adventures, thinking fondly of Rudy. Tona continues training in swordsmanship under Eris's teachings. Roxy, while traveling, meets Kishirika, the great emperor of the demon world, and helps her out of kindness. In return, Kishirika informs Roxy that Paul's family is slowly reuniting. Lilia, Aisha, and Norn are already safe. Zenith is located somewhere in the labyrinth city of Rapon on the Begarit continent. Grateful, Roxy immediately sets off to rescue Zenith. Meanwhile, Rudy remains lost in grief. One day, he recalls the loving words of his mother, Zenith, from his past life memories. Feeling a surge of purpose, Rudy finally stands back up. He steps outside again, determined to find and save Zenith. The end. And as always, if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.